For more than 1,000 years, one story has haunted Viking history. A story so disturbing that generation after generation accepted it without questions or doubts. According to medieval accounts, a defeated king was condemned to a ritual known as the Blood Eagle. It has been described as the Vikings' ultimate act of revenge, a punishment unlike any other in history. For centuries, people believed the story about the Blood Eagle. A movie was even made about it. But when historians returned to the earliest records, they uncovered a different story. To understand the Blood Eagle, we first have to understand the world that gave birth to its legend. The world of the Vikings. When people hear that name, they often picture ruthless warriors burning villages with their towering longships. But history tells a far more complicated story. The Vikings were traders, navigators, shipbuilders, farmers, craftsmen, and poets. Their ships crossed oceans that many Europeans believed were impossible to navigate. They reached Iceland, Greenland, the rivers of Eastern Europe, and even North America, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. So why has history remembered them almost entirely through violence? Because violence was often the language of power. Even in a world shaped by violence, rules were established. The Vikings valued honor above everything else, more than wealth, sometimes even more than life. But once honor was lost, it could be gone forever. Honor demanded justice, and an answered insult could disgrace a family. A single killing could ignite generations of revenge. To many Vikings, vengeance was duty, and this belief gave rise to the controversial story about the Blood Eagle. At the center of this legend stands one man, Ragnar Lothbrok. To some, he was history's greatest Viking, while to others, he never existed at all. But the truth is far more complicated. The stories describe Ragnar as a fearless warrior, a brilliant commander, a king whose raids spread fear across England and Francia. But almost everything we know about him comes from sagas written centuries later. Some historians believe Ragnar was inspired by one real Viking leader. Others argue he became a legendary figure created by combining the exploits of several different men. But whatever the truth may be, his name would become inseparable from Viking history, and his death would lead to the punishment of the Blood Eagle. According to the Norse sagas, Ragnar Lothbrok's final campaign did not end in victory, it ended in capture. The legendary Viking leader was seized by the king of Northumbria, a ruler determined to end Ragnar's reign of terror. The king ordered Ragnar's execution, not with a sword, but by casting him into a pit filled with venomous snakes. As the legend tells it, Ragnar faced death without fear instead of begging for mercy. He spoke of revenge. He declared that his sons would one day avenge him. News of Ragnar's death spread across Scandinavia. According to the sagas, his sons answered with war together. They gathered what would become known as the Great Heathen Army. This wasn't the regular Viking raid, but one of the largest Viking invasions England had ever faced. In 865 AD, the Great Heathen Army crossed the North Sea. Kingdom after kingdom fell before them. The invasion reshaped England forever. But according to the legend, their greatest objective remained unchanged: King of Northumbria, the man blamed for Ragnar's death. Eventually, the king of Northumbria was defeated. The sources agree he was captured alive. But what happened next is where history begins to divide. Some medieval writers simply state that the king was killed. Others describe something far more disturbing: a ritual unlike anything else recorded in Viking history. According to later Norse sagas, the man responsible for Ragnar's death had fallen. His execution would not be ordinary, it would become one of history's most debated legends. They called it the Blood Eagle, but before we ask whether it truly happened, we first have to understand what the medieval sources actually claimed. Everything we know about the Blood Eagle comes from medieval writers, not eyewitnesses, not Viking records. No one who supposedly witnessed the event ever described it. Instead, the story survives through manuscripts, written decades, sometimes centuries, after the Viking Age had already ended. Immediately, that raises a problem. How much of the story was history, and how much had become legend? The earliest references are surprisingly brief. One of them appears in an Old Norse poem, known as Nutsdrapa, but the poem never explains exactly what happened. It simply uses mysterious words that later generations would interpret very differently. Centuries later, the story became much more detailed. Works like Heimskringla Orkneying the Saga and Ragnarsona describe the Blood Eagle far more vividly. Then historians noticed something fascinating. Old Norse poetry rarely described events literally. Instead, it spoke in metaphors. Ships became seahorses, warriors became wolves, blood became rain. Could the Blood Eagle have been another poetic expression, one that later generations mistook for a real execution? Then there is another question. Even if the Blood Eagle was physically possible, would anyone have survived long enough for the ritual described in later accounts? Medical experts have studied the legend. Some conclude the victim would likely have died long before the ritual could be completed. Others argue parts of the description may have been exaggerated by medieval storytellers. Perhaps that is exactly why the Blood Eagle has survived, not because we know it happened, but because we cannot prove that it didn't exist. It exists in the space between history and legend, a place where facts become stories and stories become history. The Vikings left behind remarkable achievements. They explored distant lands. Yet today, one legend overshadows them all: the Blood Eagle. Was it real? The truth is, we may never know. The medieval writers believed it. Modern historians remain divided. Archaeology offers no definitive answer. Perhaps that uncertainty is the Blood Eagle's true legacy, not an execution, but a mystery that has survived for over 1,000 years. To follow up on more ancient mysteries, subscribe to this channel.